possible. My name is Sebastian. I'm Sebastian Bardou. I'm with LexisNexis. I'm VP Strategy for Continental Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I'm also the General Manager of our business in Northern and Southern Europe and Western Central Africa. I'm delighted to be speaking today with a colleague and a good friend, I like to say. We've known each other for more than 10 years, almost 12 years now, or 11. I'm not counting anymore. Ian McDougall. Ian, you've been our GC at LexisNexis for, I think, something like 2 decades. You have an astonishing track record, and I'll let you tell us a little bit about that. And you're also one of the best speakers I've met in my entire career. I thought it was me, to be honest, but I've had to come to the conclusion that it was actually you, and you've been very active to not only promote but defend the rule of law across the globe and make us LexisNexis the rule of law company, which is something that I'm extremely proud of. But you've also been a fantastic global counsel, general counsel, and that's the discussion topic for today, right? Because you've very recently published that book. I have my copy right there, which is a fantastic read. Everyone should be reading that, especially working in that specific environment, which is in-house legal teams. I think I only found one issue with that book. I think it only has one default. There's no, at least my copy, I don't have any page numbers.
Right.
But because
okay.
we tend to read it through just like a novel, it doesn't matter that much, right?
Yeah.
But that's the only thing I could say negative about that. But I've already said too much. Ian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who's Ian McDougall?
Yeah, sure. I won't go on because 20 years is a long time to talk about. But so originally as a barrister in the UK, for those who don't know, the UK has a split legal profession, solicitors and barristers. Traditionally, the idea was that the barrister would be the court advocate and effectively the consultant to the solicitor. So the solicitor had the exclusive right to deal with the lay customer, the client, and then would go to the barrister either for some technical advice or for advocacy. That's becoming much more blurred now. But my 20 years with Lexis, I've done quite a few interesting things, apart from being the General Counsel. And as Sebastian said, sort of being responsible for our corporate social responsibility program, which was to advance the rule of law. I've also done a number of things as well. I was the chief executive of the Asia Pacific region of the business. I chaired the global marketing group for a while, and I've been a regional HR director. So a wide range of interesting things. I suppose for the benefit of today's topic, the thing that I would say that's really interesting is that those other roles gave me a perspective of sitting the other side of the table to the GC. Because, for example, while I was the CEO of the Asia Pacific region, I made it my rule not to be my own general counsel. You know, I would take advice from the regional GC there. And I think she would agree with me if I were to say I didn't, you know, go around challenging the advice that I was being given. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking through rose-colored spectacles there, but I didn't. I tried not to. But it really was a very interesting experience to sit the other side of the desk and to be the recipient of general counsel advice, as well as a person who, you know, spent a long time giving it.
Yeah, which is amazing because it gives you. I mean, when you're talking about what should be like the modern general counsel, you're not only talking from your experience as a former GC, but you're from a barrister, and you've been CEO of Asia Pacific, and as you said, you've headed this global marketing forum committee, and this is when we met.
Well, if I could say that in the title, right from the title, the word modern is carrying a lot of weight.
Yeah, that was one of my
title.
questions. Actually, that was my next question. If you could say, given that broad experience and sitting on at both that side of the table, how would you describe? So, if not the ideal general counsel, but the modern, and I was putting the emphasis on modern because I think that's a very fair question to start with.
Yeah.
What do you mean by modern?
Yeah. So it's a story that really involves how the legal profession as a whole is changing over time. For example, when I first started my role in-house, if you were to say to me, what was the proportion of work that you would say was commercial as opposed to regulatory based? I would have said 80% of it was sort of commercial and 20% of it was sort of regulatory focused. I would say now that is completely flipping, and that most of the kind of questions that I would be asked involves in some way or another impact of the regulatory world upon the business. So that's the first point in the sort of the modern changeover. The second point is the different elements that are happening in society that affect the way that the General Counsel will be required to do things differently. So we've got AI. I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. That is the biggest transformation probably ever in the legal profession that we are seeing. We've got things like corporate social responsibility and how CSR is now sort of overlapping with regulatory requirements. In some parts of the world, for example, things that used to be considered purely CSR are now regulatory requirements. And so there's this overlap as well. Then we're talking about a new generation of people coming into the legal profession who want more than a salary. They want to be able to work for a company that has some kind of moral core or that has some sort of belief system that they can get behind and feel good about working for. So that all of these things are relatively new, modern in the world of the GC. And if I could just say one more thing, I go around the world, I travel around the world a lot, speaking to a lot of different people. And some years ago, if I was talking to someone about, this is particularly in the civil code world, much more in the common law world, I think, but they used to say to me, if it isn't about black letter law, it's got nothing to do with me. Yeah, that was their approach. I think that's an outdated approach. And I think it's changing even amongst those people who used to have that kind of view.
Yeah, so we're facing this wave of change and of changes, I should even say. And I really quite like the fact that your book is not, labeled like the connected or the AI-enabled GC and everything. And in some ways, you're not, you're probably more future-proof in that sense, that you're not only looking at what's getting the hype right now, but thinking about what the role is facing right now. And there's this tension between advising and deciding, and that's something that we can really feel, through the book, actually, in almost all chapters. So can you tell us a little bit about this tension or even this tendency to pick more advising or deciding?
Yeah. So it happens to be my philosophical belief that the person who is in charge of the decision making, the person who has ultimate deciding, the power to decide, shall I say, is the client. That shouldn't be something new. I mean, that should be the way that the legal profession works around the world. That is, the client decides and the lawyer advises. And I'm a passionate believer in the idea that that's what we do. We are advisors. It is up to the people who have a responsibility to make the decisions. Now, of course, you'd like to think that if you're giving high quality advice, they're going to follow your advice. That's, that's why you're there. And that's obviously the end product is to be a general counsel whose advice is trusted, respected, and more often than not followed. But the important thing here is the principle. The principle is that the client is the one who decides. And I think that's very important. It's very important ethically. It's important in respect of the code of conduct that exists in many professions around the world. So there are a number of different reasons why I'm very strong about that point. I was not the decider. I was the person who laid the law and the facts and the risks and the options in front of the decision maker for them to be able to make an educated decision.
Absolutely. So 2 chapters are, if not dedicated, at least mentioning in their titles, but they're covering that quite well. The rule of law, out of 10, if I remember properly. So that's a significant presence in your writing, and given all the time, energy, and thought that you dedicated to the rule of law, I'd like to understand to what extent it shaped the GC that you were and the kind of ideal modern GC that we are discussing about. And you talk about the rule of law with 2 different approaches, actually. The first one I think it's the first one, talking about being the custodian of the rule of law, or almost a constitutional custodian. And the other one is more around being the champion, which is a different stance. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the rule of law should be shaping our praxis, our mindset, but even as GC, the management style, because the GC is also a team manager, team leader.
Yeah, well, I mean, a huge number of different threads come together in that particular question. Let me start by the reason why I talk about the rule of law with the importance that it has. And that is that some years ago, when we first started this program, being a data-driven organization, that's effectively, how you can describe Lexis. It was important to say, okay, right, there are lots of advocates out there saying the rule of law is a good thing, right? But the question is why? Why is it a good thing? Yeah, okay. On the moral standpoint, it's a good thing because it seems to be the right way to go about running a civilized society. There are different viewpoints on that, but generally speaking, the rule of law is a way that delivers a functioning society. But from a purely practical standpoint, one of the things that we did was to look into some of the data. And the data is really quite amazing when you start to dig into it. The first thing we did, being a business, was to look at the business side of things. And one of those was to compare the strength of the rule of law with per capita GDP. It's incredible, the correlation between the two. The stronger the rule of law, the higher the per capita GDP is. Well, what does that mean? That means the stronger the rule of law, the bigger your market. Let's not shy away from the fact that that's what businesses want to do. They want to be successful. So there are commercial reasons. Interestingly enough, the other thing that we found was that it didn't seem to matter what socioeconomic measure you looked at. They all correlated with the rule of law. Infant mortality rates, average life expectancy, corruption levels, it didn't really matter. It was incredible. So if you think about it, what is commerce? Commerce is a promise. The promise that I will deliver something for you, and in exchange for that, you will give me something back. That's all. That's what commerce is. It is the exchange of a promise. Yeah. Well, the exchange of a promise without the rule of law is completely useless. You can't enforce it. You can't protect your investment. You can't do anything. So that was particularly important. So if you think about it from the point of view that it is a fundamental principle for the success of your business. Yeah. Okay, that's our starting point. Now, as the General Counsel, one of the things that I believe is that with all of those changes that are coming along that I've spoken about in the profession, AI, social changes, different things that are happening, it's really going to become absolutely crucial for General Counsel to move beyond black letter law advice and to start giving what I call holistic advice, to be the person in the room who can bring all different threads of information and data together, some of which are legal, some of which are quasi-legal, some of which are not legal at all. and to bring all of those together to be a real powerful contributor to decision making. And that's really, a way I see this a lot. GCs talk to me about, getting a seat at the top table, as they describe it. Well, how do you do that? You do that by showing value. Yeah, and how do you show value in the position of an advisor? It's by giving good advice. Right? And how do you give a good advice? Well, the best advice that you give is the advice where you can bring together different threads and give a completely holistic view so that the decision maker's got the best opportunity to making a decision. So it's not only a kind of an ethical standpoint. I mean, it would be peculiar if there was a lawyer out there who didn't think that the rule of law was a good idea. So, bringing that into part of what you do and saying, this is good for the business too, and I've got all the data to prove it, I think is part of that moving away from being just the pure reciter of legal text to being someone who's giving totally kind of holistic legal advice for a decision maker.
Right. So the rule of law is enforcing this system of trust that is necessary for economic growth and social progress. And then if I understand you well, at the company level, we replicate that, what we've seen in history and at the more global or macroeconomic level. Would you say there would be like competing, I'll say that, a competition between respecting the rule of law in everything that you do and advising, say, also serving your client, because you said you're still serving your clients. As a GC, you have a CEO, you have the senior leadership that you're potentially a part of, but that you're also advising and serving. Can you really be independent as a GC in a company that has very specific goals?
Yeah. Well, it's important to remember, I think, that there's a difference between independence and detachment. You should not be detached from the enterprise that you're advising. And I'm going to say that this applies whether you are external counsel or whether you are in-house counsel. Exactly the same thing applies. You are there to give the best possible advice as an advisor. And to do that, I think your approach should be this. I want this business to succeed. I'm a part of it. Yeah. I want this business and my colleagues to be successful in what they're doing. So my approach to legal advice is going to be, how can I help the organization deliver its objectives? Right? Now, the little tweak from my perspective is, how do I enable or allow or support the organization in delivering those objectives within the law and within an ethical standard? Yeah. Now, I do that by presenting my set of risk analysis and evidence, etc., to the decision maker. Now, it's perfectly proper for the decision maker to have a different risk judgment than my one, right? Because that's what they're there to do. They're there to make those decisions. The difficulty comes when what they're doing is either going to be unethical or illegal. Because there is a huge, huge area long before that where it's perfectly legitimate to take commercial risk, to take investment risk, whatever it might be. They're entitled to make those decisions. They're entitled to make those risk decisions. That's how they're going to be successful as a business, by assessing risk in any particular activity. So, and we're still a million miles away from something which would be illegal or unethical. So that's my approach to that.
I love the idea that this compliance culture is an enabler of growth for a company, just as the rule of law is an enabler of development.
Yes.
For society.
You see, if you don't mind me saying for a second, what I found in my experience, obviously working in the area of compliance as well, I was responsible for the compliance program, and maybe I was just supremely lucky working at Lexis. But what I found is that most compliance issues were not because someone wanted to do something deliberately bad. That just so rarely happened. What it was that they just weren't aware that what they were doing was going to lead to bad consequences, or that they ought not to be doing it. They were sitting there from a standpoint of, well, can I try this? This seems like a reasonable thing to do. Yeah. And maybe they didn't get legal advice from it. And so they went ahead and did it because they thought it was a good idea. And they weren't doing it because they were trying to be bad. They were doing it because they were trying to advance the business. And so to my mind, that's where an important element of education comes in, and helping people to make the right decisions based on the right information.
That's the perfect segue into our next topic, which is AI, the elephant in the room, and more specifically GenAI, because AI has been around actually for decades in a lot of companies, like LexisNexis, but I know a lot of others. And you're referencing that kind of paradox between, and I'm oversimplifying everything that's in your book, obviously, but this paradox between the efficiency and productivity gains that we can expect through technology, and especially through GenAI, and the fact that those technologies, they trigger new risks in the business. And as the GC, you have this paradox or this tension between the efficiency gains that you can even get for your own team, but for the entire business, and the new risks that you need to tackle. And what you've been saying just before is, say, oftentimes, not most of the time, when someone is doing something that is not in compliance in a company, there were no bad intents, right? So just trying to do something. And we say in French that to err is human, but for a real disaster, you need a computer. I believe this is very true, especially with GenAI. What's your take on that? What are the new risks and how we can tackle them, especially as the GC?
Sure. Well, so the risk, first of all, is the misapplication of technology. And I, as I say, go around talking at lots of conferences. And one of the common questions is, so how can we use this AI? Yeah, that's one of the questions I get. And I have to tell you, that's completely the wrong question. Okay? The right question is, what problem am I trying to solve? And when I have a problem that I'm trying to solve, then I can think about what's the right solution to it. That might be AI, it might not be AI. But first of all, understanding workflows, processes, all of this kind of thing, because otherwise all you're doing is building one inefficiency on top of another inefficiency by the misapplication of AI. The other thing that misapplying AI does, or misapplying any technology does, is it leads to unintended consequences. And these are all things that GCs absolutely hate, of course. The idea of an unintended consequence is usually a bit worrying to a GC. So first of all, let's put it in its proper place. The proper place for AI is to think of it as another tool that enables you to solve problems that you need to solve. It might be an efficiency problem, it might be a workflow problem, it might be a drafting problem. But either way, think about this as a problem issue first, and then a technology to solve the problem. And then, of course, we've got the other things, which is the generative AI issues themselves. Now, of course, I speak here as someone, with Lexis. So I'm sure the audience will understand that I'm trying to not be as biased as I can in answering this question. But either way, let me give it a go. This is a very important conceptual point to me. There is a massive, massive difference between what I call an open AI system, an open large language model system, and a closed large language model system. I am still absolutely amazed that there are lawyers out there relying upon open AI models to do their legal work that they are then submitting to the court. I just find it absolutely extraordinary that is still going on. I don't know how many more people are going to have to be struck off before people realize that that's really not a good idea. And why is that? It's because increasingly what we're going to see, and I've been using the expression for years now, task-based task-specific AI. It's now being called agentic AI, but in my way of looking at it, I believe agentic AI is what I've been referring to for years as task-specific AI. So, okay, just park that for a second, and now let's come back to the human world. Using an open AI model for a legal question, in my view, is like walking into a bar and asking the first drunk person you meet the question. You might get a good answer, you might get drunken nonsense. But why would you do that? What would you do in the real world? You'd go to someone who was legally trained. I mean, that's what you would do. Would you go to a lawyer to ask about whether your appendix needs removing? No, you wouldn't. You'd go to a person who is trained in that area. And you wouldn't just go to someone who was really good at general knowledge. Right? So what we're seeing now, I think, is the start of the idea that people are realizing that actually, you know, the general kind of untrained sort of model isn't the best way to get technical legal advice. What you need is something, a large language model system that has been trained on the law. And so this is kind of, you know, I think a very important point that people need to realize that if it is work product that you intend to rely on, especially work product that you intend to submit to a court, then I cannot see anything other than going to something that has been trained for that purpose. And, you know, as I say that, it sounds to me like I'm just saying something that's so obvious it barely needs saying. But we still see people out there being struck off.
Yes, and I guess part of the challenge that if we keep your metaphor of entering a bar, that third person that you're going to is actually very eloquent and dressed as a barrister.
That's right. Yes, yes.
Has all the appearances of you know, seriousness and
yes. It is, and the reason why this is a trap that people fall into is because we have a natural human desire to anthropomorphize everything that we come across. So what's happening is that, as Alan Turing said, when the large language model is playing the imitation game, and it's giving us a set of very convincing answers, people then start to imagine things like it's their friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah? that it actually has their interests at heart. That it wouldn't do anything as bad as misleading them because it has some kind of human relationship with them. It doesn't. It's a machine. So, you know, but it's a convincing machine.
Yes. So should we, as a GC, should you resist change then, technological change, or if not resist, slow it down? I know that you have a paragraph around technological resistance.
Yeah, no, I think the reverse is true. I've always had this belief, and I use the expression "the wave of change" as you know, the image that I have in mind. So imagine a wave in the sea, and that wave is change. You have two choices, in my view. You can either surf it, stay ahead of it, and roughly stay in general control of your own destiny, or you can get washed away by it. Those are the two choices that are being faced now, particularly with AI. I've been using that analogy for like 20 years, but it's finally
technological revolutions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it's finally coming to pass. And so what tends to happen is that if you are not the one leading the change, if you are not the one pushing to advance your team, yourself, etc., someone else will come along and take it out of your hands. And that's not a good position to be in. And it's increasingly, the pace of this change is happening faster and faster. So it's a case, I think, of being able to be constantly forward-looking about how you're going to deal with the changes that are coming and will continue to come.
So we're receiving right now questions on the chat. So just telling everyone that they're obviously welcome to do it. And I'm just picking one because it takes us back to the first part of our conversation, especially around independence and independence. And I would say, is AI changing that in the way in a specific way. So just turning to the question, just reading the question, how can a GC stay commercially supportive while still preserving enough independence to challenge the business when needed? And this is where I would, because it again takes us back to the first part of our conversation, but is AI changing any of those? Just to say, can you be challenged internally? Because AI might be saying, especially, you know, those open general purpose AI that you're talking about, is that they were not trained specifically on legal, or they're not using a corpus of legal documentation that's solid enough to, as grounding data for their answer. So they might be extremely wrong, right? They might be hallucinating and so on. Is that creating the fact that your CEO in an organization can have access to that kind of open AI? I'm not referring to the company, but just more the open model AI, or general purpose AI. Are they creating more risk that the CEO will turn to them, ask question, and find some competing advice from their GC, and how you can deal with that if that happens?
Yeah, the reason why I think it's a risk that is quite rare and that is unlikely to happen very often is because, let's think about it in this way. The technology to replace the lawyer or the legal advice has been around for 500 years. It's called a book. Anyone can walk into a library and read everything that I know about law, and a lot more besides. They've always had that skill and ability. And then when the internet came along, and suddenly that access to that information, it's publicly available information. The statutes are usually publicly available information. In many countries around the world, case law can be publicly available information as well. So the fact that AI has come along hasn't changed the fact that this information is already available to people who want to look it up. But they don't. And why don't they? I think there's a couple of obvious reasons. One is because they've got a different job to do. And two, that's backed up by a wonderful book written in the 1780s by Adam Smith on the division of labor. But if someone is actually spending their time doing legal research, when they're not part of the legal team or part of the GC's group, I think they're wasting their time. But there's no reason to suppose that they would suddenly start doing that now any more than they could before.
So what would be your best tips or best practices? What would you recommend to do when implementing GenAI in a company or in a in-house legal team?
Yeah. First of all, understand your workflow process. Understand whereabouts AI is going to sit in the workflow and how it can contribute to what you have to do. Because, as I said before, if you don't do that, you're just in danger of adding another step in an already inefficient workflow. Here's another little tip that I think was unique to our team. I don't know anyone else who's done this. I'm going to claim it as my invention. But we invented something called the stop list. And the stop list is the idea that every year you take some time and look and try to find things that you should no longer be doing because they don't add value anymore. In a way, companies and all organizations are very good at adding responsibilities for people, but they're not so good at taking away things that are of now no longer any value. And I'll give you an example. When I first became the GC, some of my team in different parts of the world were producing something like 30 different reports a month. And I just asked the question, could you stop those reports this month and tell me who complained? And well, lo and behold, nobody complained. It meant that those reports that had been done for years before, were being done because that was the tradition, not because they were being useful. So sorry for this rather long answer, but I think it's really important to take these things in the right sequence of steps. Look at the workflow, drive efficiency in the workflow. Are there things you don't need to be doing anymore? And then you start to think about, okay, so now how can I fit AI into this workflow? And it might mean, for example, that part of your workflow is drafting document X. And to the extent that you don't have a template that you can use, which is the ideal scenario, of course, you reusing the same template. But to the extent that you need something that's configurable, okay, will AI be able to help me draft that document in that part of the workflow? That's kind of the way that I would approach it.
Very good. There's I was just looking at the book, because there's the part that I really like around, you could say, AI fluency. You're talking about AI literacy, and using that word, which I think is very strong, is credibility. Saying that GC, they need to build technological credibility to be effective. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's all part of the same philosophy that I've been talking about. If you, as the GC, are the one making advancing proposals instead of being pushed that way by the business, your credibility goes through the roof straight away. That's point number one. If you are the one seen to be taking a lead on how can I develop this legal team, this legal department, the services that we provide, how can I find ways of improving it before being asked to do so? This is a tremendous credibility builder for you. Hey, CEO, I've just worked out that if we do this, this, and this, I'm going to save the sales team like 20% of their time. Fantastic. Who could think anything other than that this is a GC who is contributing to the business? So I think that's really the starting point in the building of credibility. Then, of course, it is the case of showing how you're integrating the technology into what you're doing. Don't wait to be asked about this stuff. Make it known. Make it known. Hey, this is what we've introduced to the legal team. This is how we're using it. This is the effect that it's having. This is the improvement that it's delivering. All of this kind of stuff, taking the lead, being proactive in these kind of areas is all going to add, hopefully, the quality of your legal advice as well, which is table stakes. And all of this stuff will build on it, and people will be saying, okay, this is a GC who actually knows what they're doing, who's making a contribution, and is making our lives easier too.
Absolutely agree. I've just can add something. I believe that the legal professionals, especially in-house, GenAI is a fantastic opportunity because it's a technology that's much closer to the way than the lawyer operates, right? It's based, even if, okay, beyond the scenes, probably mostly mathematical because it's based on vectors and everything. But if you look at the technology and the way that it operates, it's based on reasoning. It's based on generating text, analyzing text, and it's a technology that feels very close to a lawyer mindset and the set of skills of lawyers. And I found so much amazing use cases for legal tasks, whereas in other functions across organization, it can be much more challenging. I'm not saying there are no use cases for other functions. Obviously, we have a ton, but I feel like the ability of lawyers to gain value out of LLMs when executed properly is probably beyond any other function across the organization. I think it's even stronger than for code development, which has been a very strong use case. I believe that you don't get as much good code as you get good lawyer work, especially drafting.
Indeed, and you've just hit the nail on the head with the last word you said. What is it that lawyers do? They work with words.
Absolutely.
And so, having a tool that is great at supporting their generation of words or their analysis of words, whatever it might be, is tremendously important. Here's the way I give you another analogy of the way that I think that lawyers should think about the contribution that generative AI, particularly large language models, can have. I am old enough to remember a time when I was not allowed to take a calculator into a maths exam, because the maths world thought, my God, this will be the end of mathematics. If the calculator's doing it, what is there for the student to actually do? In fact, think about it in this way. The calculator was allowed into maths exams to do the grunt work. And then what happens is that the maths student takes the output from the calculator and does something of higher value with it. Yeah. I think this is the same thing here. If you think about this in the right way, the analogy applies. The grunt work, word production, word analysis, word research, yeah, is done by the large language model, by the computer. Yeah. Then it's up to the lawyer to take the output and apply it, to do something of higher value with it, to use it to give holistic advice, or to create a document that is actually specific to the needs here. Think about it as not so much replacing what a lawyer does, but of moving the lawyer up the value chain, and of taking away lower value, repetitive kind of functions, and allowing the lawyer to focus on applied law as opposed to regurgitating law.
On a new topic, we received another excellent question on the chat. So from Catherine, in a crisis, what does good GC leadership look like beyond simply giving legal advice?
Calmness. I'm going to say that. I'm going to answer that in one word. While all around you, they're losing their heads, you're the one who's going to stay calm, because you're the one who's not, or trying not to, consider things based on emotion and fear and panic. You're the one that's going to bring the data together, the evidence together. What is the law in this situation? How does the law require that we act in a certain situation? And it's about analysis and staying calm. And you would be amazed, because it certainly happened in my experience, how when tension is high, the ability to be the calm person in the room is incredibly powerful. It's a very, very, very powerful position to take. It's, yes, I understand everybody's all upset about this, but let's just take a step back and start the process of analysis. Whoa, suddenly you've taken the intellectual high ground. And that's a very powerful position to be in. I would say in moments of high stress, of high tension, the ability to stay calm and give advice in that way is the golden ticket.
Well, that's super interesting and thought-provoking, because you could say, like, the cliche of lawyers, and I'm going to refer to a cliche, an absolute cliche, sorry about that, but just to be a good sparring partner, would be that, as a lawyer, you are always thinking about the potential, bad outcome of any situation. What can happen in litigation? What's the risk? Is there like a fine risk and everything? So you could be actually the one who's actually stressing out all the potential issues that we'll be facing, right? Your risk is to protect the company from risk, but you need to state risk. So sometimes you could be seen as not that calm person, but someone who's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, well, that's why your advice has to be grounded in the idea of the how we can help the company move forward, because the total avoidance of risk is not getting out of bed in the morning, right? And so, but that's not a realistic position to take. The starting position, I think, of a commercial GC should be, how can I help this company to deliver its aims? Now, that means balance, nuance, all of these kind of things. It means saying, yes, there are risks, but let's look at the opportunities too. Let's consider those things. I'm going to make you aware of the situation as these kind of bad things could happen. Yeah. And you have to balance that against the possibility that these good things can happen. Now, what I'm going to try and do is not stop my advice there. I'm going to then go on and say, but in order to make these good things happen, I reckon we should do this, 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 and this. And that would be a better way to deliver the outcomes than just kind of considering and worrying about whether there's a bad thing that's going to happen. Like I say, there's a bad thing can happen as I step outside this building, but I'm still going to step outside the building because I've, automatically analyzed that that's in my interest to do. So,
we're almost on time. I'm just taking like a final question from the chat. We have one that says, for a first-time general counsel, what should the priorities be in the first 90 days to build credibility with the CEO and board?
Ask questions. This is, again, my golden rule. And I use this also for I sometimes get asked, oh, I've just been invited to join a board. Yeah. How should I approach joining the board? I would say pick a time scale, let's say 6 months, it doesn't really matter. For those first 6 months, you should be asking questions. How does that work? Why are you doing that? Yeah. Can you tell me about how that happens and why that happens? And I'll be cynical just for a second.
Yeah, but does it mean that you'll be refraining from advising? We said that the role
Oh yeah, no, you have to be able to advise, but your advice will get better the longer you're in situ, and your advice will get better the more you know about what people do, because it becomes contextual advice as opposed to, well, section 5 of this act says this. I mean, that's barely useful advice to a commercial person. Yeah, what's really advisable is, I know what you're trying to do, and I know why you're trying to do it. So now I can approach giving you the legal advice from this perspective. Take the time to ask people about what they do and how they do it. I absolutely promise you one thing. People love talking about what they do. They absolutely love it. There's almost no scenario where you'll sit down with some senior leader and say, can you tell me about how you do your job? I'm interested. They absolutely love it. They'll probably sit there for well past the point at which you're finding it useful. But it's a really important thing to do. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's not, it doesn't undermine your position. What you're doing, if you want to have a technical way of justifying this, is you're gathering data, you're gathering evidence. Yeah. And that's what you need in order to give advice. So I would say for a first time GC, and by the way, be frank about this with the CEO who's appointing you. Yeah. By the way, just so you know, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about the way people do things, because that's going to help me give advice. So, you know, I'm preparing you. I'm laying the groundwork for the way that I'm going to be conducting myself over the course of the coming months. And what you will find is that, number one, you'll build up the data, the information about practical legal advice. Number two, you'll build relationships with the people that you are going to be advising. And there's another important point. It's way, way, way easier to give bad news to a friend than it is to give bad news to a colleague. So again, you know, think about that. The relationship building part is something that's very often overlooked by GCs. They think they've got to, you know, somehow stand apart and be sort of separate from everything else that goes on. There's no reason for that at all. And in fact, all it's doing is denying you access to information that could be useful to you. And once you've built up that credibility, the ability then for you to say, actually, I don't think you should do this. You know, my view is that this is a bad idea because of this, this, this. And a better idea would be doing this, this, and this. You've got way, way more chance of being listened to.
You know, what's fascinating as well is that the kind of two capacities or qualities that you just referenced is, say, form of autonomous curiosity, right? And relationships. Those are things that GenAI doesn't have.
That's right.
GenAI can ask questions, but in a very specific context, in very strong intention, and what I just call like autonomous curiosity or curiosity in general is not a trait of AI. And I think that's a very interesting note and fascinating note to probably conclude our discussion today. I'd like to thank everyone who attended. Thank you also to those who asked very good questions.
Can I just say, do feel free to buy the book. It's available on Amazon.
I was coming to it. I think we'll share a link if it was not done already. It's available on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. And again, it's an excellent read. Very easy read, again, despite the lack of page numbering. It's a great one.
Could I just say one thing about it as well? It is, in a way, idealistic. Every GC is not going to be able to implement everything that's in that book. Yeah. What you've got to be able to do is use your judgment and take those things that you think will be most powerful, most effective in the environment that you are actually operating in. So, you know, like life is like a box of chocolates is the phrase. Well, treat that book as a box of chocolates and pick out the things that you think can be most helpful to you.
Well, it's definitely a recommended read. And
Thank you.
thanks again for making the time for the great conversation that we just had. I've learned a lot by reading the book and by discussing with you. Thank you, everyone who attended. And yeah, we'll speak another day, hopefully.
Thank you.